My name is Lark, and if you've ever poured your soul into something only to have someone else sign their name at the bottom, then you need to hear this. It helps to know I'm not just screaming this story into the void. So if you get it, if you've ever felt that particular kind of erasure, let me know in the comments. Like the video, subscribe. It means a lot to know I'm not alone in this. The end for me, Advanced Family Kitchens, didn't come with a bang. It came with the quiet, sterile hum of a projector in a conference room that was always kept just a few degrees too cold. Caleb stood at the head of the table, beaming. He had the smile he used for investors and magazine interviews, all teeth and no warmth, like a polished white tombstone. He was clicking through a presentation, the slides filled with soulless corporate graphics and words like synergy, optimization, and forward-facing brand realignment. He said, and as we pivot towards a new, more dynamic market position, we've made the difficult decision to streamline our leadership structure. I felt a quiet heat flush up my neck. I knew that word, streamline. It was a corporate synonym for behead. He was the head of product development. For 10 years, I had been the beating heart of that company. He recipes, the ones that made us a national name, were my grandmother's. He were the scent of my childhood, the legacy of her love, written in flour, sugar, and spice. I had taken that legacy and built an empire from it. My hands, my palate, my soul. Caleb clicked to the next slide. It showed a new organizational chart. My name wasn't on it. My box, head of product development, was just gone. In its place, under Caleb's own title of CEO, was a new, smaller box, brand manager. And inside it was the name of his latest 24-year-old hire. A girl whose entire resume consisted of a popular Instagram account dedicated to smoothie bowls. The room was silent. My team, the people I had hired and mentored, stared at their notepads, at the table, anywhere but at me. They were good people, but they had mortgages and families. I didn't blame them for their silence. Fear is its own kind of currency in a place like that. The meeting ended. Caleb asked me to stay behind. The fake sympathy in his eyes was more insulting than open hostility would have been. He slid a thin folder across the polished mahogany. A severance agreement. It was a pittance, an insult wrapped in legal jargon. He said, "Lark, you've been a foundational part of our early growth. We all appreciate it." He didn't say your growth. He said our growth. He'd been saying that for a decade. I just looked at him. I didn't touch the folder. I think my stillness unnerved him. He was expecting tears or shouting. I gave him nothing. My grandmother taught me how to measure ingredients with precision. She also taught me that some moments require you to measure your response with the same exactitude. A gram too much of emotion, and you ruin the entire result. He cleared his throat, his composure slipping just a little. Look, it's just business. The brand needs a fresh face, a new energy. I finally spoke. My voice was level, almost unnaturally calm. I asked him about the recipes, the new ones I had been developing, the summer collection, the holiday specials, months of my work, my intellectual property. He gave me that smug smile again, the one that made my teeth ache. He leaned back in his chair, the picture of condescending power. "Ah yes," he said, the words dripping with false regret. "I'm afraid you'll find in your employment contract that all recipes, all product development, anything created on company time, well, it all belongs to the company." He tapped the company logo on his presentation screen. "It's standard practice, Lark. You know that." He thought that was the final word, the checkmate. He had my work, my legacy, my job. He had erased me, and was now explaining the mechanics of the eraser. What he didn't know, what he couldn't possibly know, was that this wasn't an ending. It was a trigger. He had just reminded me of the one thing he didn't own, the one thing he couldn't control, and it was far more powerful than a recipe for pumpkin spice scones. He didn't own the integrity behind them. He didn't own the family name, and he had no idea that my grandmother, Eleanor Vance, was a much better strategist than he would ever be. He smugly owned the products, I was about to quietly own his entire company. The drive home was a blur of traffic lights, bleeding into one another. My hands were locked on the steering wheel, my knuckles white. The city felt muffled, like I was underwater. In the passenger seat sat a single cardboard box. It held a decade of my life, a framed photo of my team, a stupid coffee mug that said "World's Best Food Scientist," a couple of notebooks filled with my cramped, frantic handwriting, the detritus of a life I thought I was building. When I got to my apartment, the silence was deafening. It was a nice place, a corner unit with big windows overlooking the park, a place I could afford because of the success I had built, a success that now felt like a cruel joke. I dropped the box by the door. I didn't want to unpack it. Unpacking it would make it real. Instead, I walked into my kitchen. It was my sanctuary. Stainless steel, butcher block, a rack of spices that I curated like a librarian. It was a smaller, more modern version of my grandmother's kitchen. I ran my hand over the cool marble countertop, and my composure, the one I had held together with sheer force of will in that boardroom, finally shattered. It wasn't a loud, screaming breakdown. It was a quiet collapse. My legs gave out, and I just slid down the cabinets to the floor. The tears came, then, hot and silent. It wasn't just about the job. It wasn't just about the money. It was about the name. Vance Family Kitchens. He had taken my grandmother's name, my name, and hollowed it out, leaving a branded shell. For 10 years, I had poured every ounce of my being into that company. Every late night, every early morning, every holiday spent tweaking a formula instead of being with family. And for what? To be streamlined by a man who thought a brand was something you could design on a PowerPoint slide. My mind started to spiral backwards, replaying the highlight reel of my own naivety. A series of moments, little cuts that I had ignored, that had finally led to this amputation. I remembered the very beginning. I was 25, fresh out of culinary school, with a degree in food science, and my grandmother, Eleanor, had just passed away. And we were in her kitchen, the heart of her home. The air was thick with the ghost of cinnamon and yeast. In the end, my mom handed me a heavy, leather-bound book, her recipe journal. It wasn't just lists of ingredients. It was her diary. Notes in the margins about my grandfather's favorite cookies, what she baked the day my mother was born, a smudge of chocolate next to a recipe for a cake she made for my 5th birthday. "She wanted you to have this," my mom had said. She always said you had her hands. That night, I sat with the book and felt a purpose crystallize in my chest. These recipes were a story of family, of love, of a life well lived. And I wanted to share that story. I didn't want her legacy to die with her. That was the seed of Vance Family Kitchens. It started small, in a rented commercial kitchen, with me and 2 friends, selling her famous lemon bars at farmers markets. They sold out every weekend. The first big cut came 2 years in. We were growing too fast. We needed capital. That's when Caleb's investment group found us. He was slick, charming, and he talked a big game about national distribution and market share. He saw the potential, or rather, he saw the dollar signs. He bought a majority stake, promising to handle the business side, so I could focus on what I did best, the product. I was young, and I was so desperate to see my grandmother's name on shelves across the country that I agreed. My first mistake. I thought we were partners. He thought he had hired a talented cook. Then came the first theft of credit. We landed a feature in a major food magazine. It was a huge moment. The article was supposed to be about the heart of the brand, the story of my grandmother. I spent a week with the journalist, baking with her, sharing stories, showing her the recipe journal. When the magazine came out, there was a 2-page spread, a huge glossy photo of Caleb, leaning against a rustic-looking counter in a studio, holding a plate of my grandmother's cookies. The article quoted him extensively about his vision for authentic home-style baking. My name was mentioned once, in passing, as the head of product development. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. I confronted him. I walked into his office, the magazine shaking in my hand. He didn't even have the grace to look guilty. He waved it off. Lark, it's about branding. We need a single strong face for the company. It's cleaner. It's better for the narrative. My grandmother's narrative. He was packaging and selling my life, and telling me it was good for business. I should have walked right then, but a part of me, a deeply ingrained, foolish part, felt a sense of responsibility. If I left, who would protect the recipes? Who would fight for the real butter, the real vanilla? I convinced myself that staying was the only way to honor my grandmother's legacy. It was a lie I told myself for years. It was debatable logic. I see that now. I was choosing to be a warden in my own prison, believing I could keep the other inmates from tearing the place down. It wasn't strength. It was a form of self-sabotage, born from a misplaced sense of duty. The fights became a regular occurrence. The biggest ones were always about ingredients. I remember one battle that lasted for weeks. Our supply chain for Madagascar vanilla beans was becoming expensive. Caleb wanted to switch to vanillin, a synthetic compound made from wood pulp. It was a fraction of the cost. He brought in charts and profit projections. He said, "No one will taste the difference, Lark. It's a rounding error on the palate, but a huge win on the balance sheet." I brought in 2 batches of our signature shortbread, one made with real vanilla, one with his synthetic garbage. I made the entire executive team do a blind taste test. Even Caleb could tell the difference. The real vanilla was warm, complex, floral. The synthetic was harsh, one note, with a chemical aftertaste. I won, but it cost me. I was labeled difficult, artistic, not commercial. I was the roadblock to higher profit margins. It was during one of those fights that I truly found my only real ally in that place. Arthur Pym. Arthur was the head of logistics and supply chain. He was a quiet, meticulous man in his late 50s, with a love for complex systems and a fierce, unspoken loyalty. He had been one of the first people I hired after the initial investment, back when I still had that power. He'd known my grandmother briefly, having delivered produce to a restaurant she once consulted for. He revered her. He saw the company, not as a cash cow, but as a testament to her standards. I remember we were trying to source a specific variety of heirloom tomato for a new savory tart. The big corporate suppliers Caleb preferred didn't carry it. They offered cheap, watery Roma tomatoes. Caleb told me to make do. A tomato is a tomato, Lark. Don't be precious. I went to Arthur's office, a chaotic space filled with maps, shipping manifests, and the faint smell of cardboard. I explained the problem. He didn't say anything for a full minute. He just looked at a map on his wall, tracing a line with his finger. Then he picked up the phone and called a small, family-run farm in Northern California he knew from a past life. A farm that was, by his own admission, a logistical nightmare. 2 weeks later, crates of the most perfect, sun-ripened, heirloom tomatoes arrived at our facility. They smelled like actual summer. The tart was a bestseller. Caleb took the credit, of course. He bragged about our innovative and agile supply chain. Arthur and I just shared a look across the boardroom. It was a look that said, "We know, that's all that matters." From that day on, Arthur was my co-conspirator in the quiet war for quality. He would tip me off when Caleb was trying to sneak in a cheaper pallet of flour, or when a supplier was being changed without my approval. We were the guardians of the gate, fighting a battle no one else knew was happening. Sitting there on my kitchen floor, the cold tile seeping into my bones, all these memories swirled around me. I saw the pattern so clearly now. It wasn't one grand betrayal. It was a death by 1,000 cuts. A slow, methodical erosion of my voice, my contribution, my identity, until there was nothing left to streamline. The despair was a physical weight. I felt like I had not only failed myself, but I had failed my grandmother. I had let her legacy, her very name, be co-opted and corrupted by a man who saw it as nothing more than a trademark. I pulled my knees to my chest and finally let out a sob, a ragged, ugly sound that the silence of the apartment swallowed whole. And then, something shifted. In the depths of that despair, a different memory surfaced. It was from the week after my grandmother's funeral. The lawyer's office. Mr. Abernathy, a man who looked like he was from another century, all tweed and quiet dignity. He had been my family's lawyer for 50 years. He had sat me down to go over Eleanor's will. I remembered being numb, not really processing the legal language. He talked about her house, her personal effects, and then he talked about the rest of her estate. My grandmother, the woman who wore aprons stained with flour, and whose greatest joy was a perfectly risen loaf of bread, had been an incredibly shrewd and secret investor. She had inherited a small sum from her own father, and had spent decades growing it with a quiet, conservative brilliance. The inheritance she left me, significant. Far more than a 25-year-old baker knew what to do with. At the time, I had put it all into a trust, managed by Abernathy's firm, and tried to forget about it. I was focused on the recipes, on building the company. The money felt abstract, unreal. But as I sat on my kitchen floor, another part of that meeting came back to me, a specific detail I hadn't thought about in a decade. Abernathy had separated a single thin file from the rest of the paperwork. It was about the company, the sale of the name, and the recipes. I remembered his words, his dry, precise voice, cutting through my grief. Eleanor was very particular about this, Lark. She believed a name is not a thing to be bought and sold like a sack of flour. It is a promise, and she has built a failsafe into that promise. A failsafe. The word echoed in the silent kitchen. I scrambled to my feet, my heart starting to pound with a new, unfamiliar rhythm. It wasn't the frantic beat of anxiety. It was the slow, heavy thrum of a war drum. I went to my home office, to the old filing cabinet where I kept my most important personal documents. I dug past old tax returns and bank statements until my fingers found it, a thin blue folder labeled Vance, EV Estate. I pulled it out, my hands trembling slightly. Inside was a copy of the original agreement between me and Caleb's investment firm, and clipped to the back was a separate, smaller document. It was titled Addendum to Trademark Licensing Agreement. The Integrity Clause. My eyes scanned the dense legal text, my mind racing. And there it was, the failsafe. My grandmother, my brilliant, forward-thinking grandmother, had not sold her name. She had licensed it, and the license was conditional. The clause, which her lawyer had affectionately nicknamed the Eleanor Clause, stipulated that the name Vance Family Kitchens could only be used on products that adhered to a strict set of quality standards. These standards were laid out in a separate, privately held document she called the Product Bible. It specified everything, from the grade of flour, to the origin of the cinnamon to the percentage of real butterfat in the butter. And here was the masterstroke, the line that made the breath catch in my throat. In the event these standards are demonstrably compromised, the right to use the aforementioned trademark can be immediately and irrevocably revoked by the designated heir of the Vance family estate. The designated heir, me. Caleb didn't own my family's name. He was renting it, and he was about to violate the terms of the lease. A cold, clean clarity washed over me, wiping away the tears, the despair, the sense of victimhood. The heat in my neck from the boardroom was gone, replaced by an icy calm. He thought he had taken everything. He thought he had won. He had no idea that he had just armed me. He had pushed me out of the building, but he'd forgotten I held the deed to the land it was built on. I stood up and walked back to the kitchen. I looked at the box of my things by the door. It no longer looked like a box of failure. It looked like a box of kindling. It wasn't about revenge. I told myself that then, and I tell myself that now. Revenge is a hot, messy, emotional thing. This was going to be cold. It was going to be a correction, a rebalancing of the scales. Caleb had turned my grandmother's legacy into a soulless brand. I was about to turn his company into a smoking crater, and I was going to do it with the money she had left me, using the weapon she had hidden in plain sight. The first call I made wasn't to a headhunter or a therapist. It was to a number I hadn't dialed in 10 years. A number I kept in an old address book, not in my phone. The direct line to Mr. Abernathy. An elderly-sounding woman answered on the first ring, Abernathy, Miller, and Finch. I asked for him. When he came on the line, his voice was exactly as I remembered, like dry autumn leaves skittering across pavement. "Lark," he said, without a hint of surprise. "I must confess, I have been expecting your call for some time now." That one sentence confirmed everything. He knew. He had always known this day might come. My grandmother had chosen her lawyer, as well as she had chosen her ingredients. I explained what had happened with Caleb, the rebranding, the termination. He listened patiently, without interruption. When I finished, there was a long pause. "The man is a fool," he said, finally. "A statement of fact, not an insult. He has mistaken the packaging for the gift. The Eleanor clause, as you recall, is quite clear. And I assure you, it is ironclad." He signed it. His high-priced lawyers were so focused on the financials they barely glanced at the addenda. A common and fatal mistake. He then said, "Lark, your grandmother's portfolio has performed adequately. The resources at your disposal are considerable. The question is not whether we can act. The question is how you wish to proceed." I told him my idea. It was audacious, a half-formed seed of a plan that had sprouted in the ruins of my despair. I didn't just want to revoke the name. That would be a victory, yes, but an incomplete one. Caleb would just rebrand the company, sell the same inferior products under a new name, and continue to profit from the infrastructure I had built. No, that wasn't enough. I wanted to dismantle it from the inside out. I wanted to take it all back. "I want to buy the company," I said. The words felt strange and powerful, coming out of my mouth. Abernathy was silent for another long moment. I could almost hear the gears turning in his shrewd old mind. "A hostile takeover," he murmured. "Aggressive, complicated, but elegant. Yes, I think Eleanor would approve of the poetry in that. To do it, however, you will need more than just capital. You will need a partner. Someone who understands the nuances of such a maneuver. Someone discreet and utterly ruthless." He gave me a name, Evelyn Reed. She was a senior partner at a private equity firm called Viridian Capital. It wasn't one of the big, flashy Wall Street behemoths. It was a boutique firm, known in very specific circles for its quiet, strategic acquisitions of undervalued or poorly managed companies. They were corporate assassins who moved like ghosts. The next day, I was sitting in a minimalist, brutally chic office that overlooked the financial district. The air smelled like money and ambition. Evelyn Reed was a woman in her late 40s, with sharp eyes and a sharper suit. She didn't offer platitudes or sympathy. She offered me a bottle of water and a single direct question. "Mr. Abernathy says you have a unique leverage point and the capital to back a play." He was, however, short on details. "So Lark Vance, tell me why I should risk my firm's capital on what sounds, on the surface, like an employee's revenge fantasy." She was testing me. She wanted to see if I was emotional, unstable, a bad investment. This was my first real test. I had to prove I was no longer the artistics product developer Caleb had painted me as. I had to be a predator. I didn't talk about my feelings. I didn't talk about my grandmother. I opened my briefcase and laid out a series of folders on her glass desk. The first contained a complete financial analysis of Vance Family Kitchens. I had spent the entire night building it from memory and public filings. I showed her the revenue growth, the market penetration, the profit margins. I showed her the machine I had built. "This is the company's value, with the current product integrity," I said, my voice as calm and steady as hers. "It's strong, but it's stagnant, because Caleb is a marketer, not a builder. His only idea for growth is to cut costs." Then I opened the second folder. It contained a detailed projection model. "This is what will happen to the company when he starts degrading the product to boost short-term profits. A 15% drop in customer retention in the first quarter, a 25% decline in wholesale orders by the end of the second. A catastrophic loss of brand loyalty within a year. He's about to poison his own well. Finally, I slid the Eleanor clauses across the desk. And this is the poison pill. The brand's most valuable asset is its name. A name he doesn't actually own. The moment he compromises the product, the name vanishes. The company becomes a generic food manufacturer with a failing product line, angry customers, and worthless stock. But the infrastructure, the distribution channels, the production facilities, the supplier contracts I personally negotiated, that all remains. It's a Rolls-Royce, and he's about to replace the engine with one from a lawnmower. I leaned back. I'm not asking you to invest in a revenge fantasy, Evelyn. I'm offering you the chance to buy a multi-million-dollar company for pennies on the dollar, just before its current, incompetent CEO drives it off a cliff. The capital from my grandmother's estate is the down payment. The clause is our insurance policy. I'm not here to get my job back. I'm here to buy it. Evelyn Reed stared at me, her face unreadable. She picked up the clause and read it. Then she read it again. A slow, thin smile spread across her lips. It wasn't a warm smile. It was the smile of a shark that has just scented blood in the water. This is the most beautifully vicious piece of legal work I have ever seen, she said, tapping the paper. Your grandmother was a monster. I mean that as the highest possible compliment. She looked at me, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of genuine respect in her eyes. All right, Lark fans. You have my attention. Let's talk about how we structure the acquisition. The next few weeks were a blur of meetings in anonymous conference rooms, encrypted emails, and phone calls. We were building a war machine in total secrecy. Evelyn and her team at Viridian were masters of this world. They set up a series of shell corporations, LLCs, with bland, forgettable names like Mid-Atlantic Holdings and Blue Ridge Investments. These entities would be the public face of the stock purchases, obscuring any link back to me or Viridian. My role was to provide the intelligence. I knew the company's weaknesses. I knew which of the early-stage private investors were disillusioned with Caleb's leadership. I had heard their grumblings in board meetings for years. I gave Evelyn a list. Her team approached them, not with a hostile offer, but with a quiet, friendly inquiry. We've been watching Vance Kitchens. We're interested in acquiring a minority position if you're ever looking to liquidate. It was subtle, patient. While Evelyn's financial army was laying siege to the company's stock, my part of the plan was quieter, more personal. I needed my own intelligence network. I needed an eye on the inside. I needed Arthur. I met him at a small, dingy diner, halfway between his house and mine. It was the kind of place no one from our corporate world would ever be caught dead in. The coffee was burnt, and the seats were cracked vinyl. It was perfect. Arthur looked tired. He slid into the booth opposite me. His shoulders slumped. I heard what happened, Lark, he said, his voice low. It's a disgrace. The whole place is upside down. That new girl, the brand manager, she asked me yesterday if we could source more Instagrammable packaging. Didn't ask about what was going inside it, just the box. I let him vent. I let him talk about the slide, in morale, the confusion on the production floor. Then I laid it out for him. Not the whole plan, not the takeover. That was too much, too risky for him. I told him a modified truth. Arthur, I'm not going to let him destroy my grandmother's work, I said. I'm documenting the decline in quality. I'm building a case against him for breach of contract. It was vague, but it was enough. I need your help. I need to know what's happening on the supply side. I need proof. He looked at me, his brow furrowed. He was a good man, a cautious man. I was asking him to spy on his own company, on his own boss. It was a huge risk. He's changing the flour, isn't he? I asked, a cold certainty in my gut. He's going with that cheap, high-yield bleached stuff from a mega distributor, not the unbleached winter wheat we were getting from the Miller's Co-op in Kansas. Arthur's eyes widened slightly. He gave a slow, deliberate nod. The first shipment arrived Tuesday. The bakers are already complaining. It doesn't absorb moisture the same way. The doughs are sticky, harder to work with. I need you to document it, Arthur, I said. My voice barely a whisper. Copy the purchase orders. Get the supplier's name, the lot numbers. Take a photo of the bags. Anything you can, but only if you feel safe. He took a long sip of his terrible coffee. He stared out the window at the passing traffic. I thought he was going to say no. I was preparing myself for it. I had no right to ask this of him. Then he looked back at me, and his eyes were clear. Your grandmother once sent my wife a basket of her lemon bars when she was sick. She didn't even know her. She just heard from the produce guy that my wife was having a rough time. She just did it. No reason. He shook his head. This isn't his company to ruin. It has a good name. He pushed his coffee cup aside. Tell me what you need, Lark. I'll get it for you. That was the moment the plan felt truly real. I had the capital. I had the legal weapon. I had the financial muscle. And now, I had my inside man, my quiet, loyal soldier in the heart of the enemy camp. The silent takeover had begun. The first reports from Arthur came a week later, delivered not by email or text, but through a dead drop. He left a plain manila envelope for me at a dry cleaner we had agreed upon. It felt cloak and dagger, something out of a spy movie. But the paranoia was necessary. Inside was the first piece of hard evidence, a copy of a purchase order for 5 tons of high-fructose corn syrup. We had never used corn syrup, ever. My grandmother's recipes called for honey, molasses, or pure cane sugar. It was a cardinal rule. I stared at the paper, a cold fury building in my chest. This was it, the beginning of the end. Caleb wasn't just cutting corners. He was taking a sledgehammer to the foundation of the brand. Viridian Capital, meanwhile, was moving with brutal efficiency. Evelyn's team worked like sharks in a feeding frenzy, but so gracefully that the water barely rippled. They bought up small blocks of publicly traded stock, never enough at one time to trigger alarms. They successfully courted 2 of the original private investors I had identified. Men who were tired of Caleb's focus on marketing fluff over solid financials. By the end of the first month, our shadow coalition, hidden behind the network of shell companies, controlled just over 20% of Vance family kitchens. We weren't a majority, not yet, but we were a significant, and totally anonymous, bloc. The first tremors inside the company started to be felt. Arthur told me about it in our weekly diner meetings. He'd slide into the booth, looking more stressed each time, and hand me a new envelope. The contents were a catalog of horrors for a food purist. The purchase orders for the cheap flour and corn syrup were followed by invoices for artificial butter flavoring, powdered eggs to replace the fresh ones, and waxy, low-grade chocolate compound, instead of the pure cacao berry calabaut chocolate we had always used. He's calling it Project Streamlined, Arthur said, his voice laced with disgust. Holding meetings with the finance department, bragging about the cost savings. He's projecting a 12% boost in gross margin for the next quarter. The new brand manager, she's designing new packaging that screams new and improved taste. The irony was so thick it was suffocating. Then, the inevitable happened. The customers started to notice. It began as a trickle. A few comments on the company's social media pages. Did you change the recipe for the oatmeal cookies? They taste different. My kids won't eat the brownies anymore. They have a weird chemical taste. The social media team, under the direction of the new brand manager, had a standard, dismissive response. We're always working to improve our products. Thanks for the feedback. But the trickle soon became a flood. The comments turned angry. Product review websites, which had once been a sea of 5-star ratings, were now littered with 1- and 2-star warnings. Longtime customer, but I'm done. This is not the same product. Vance Family Kitchens has sold out. Tastes like cheap gas station garbage now. Arthur described the mood in the office as a mix of confusion and panic. The sales team was getting hammered with calls from angry grocery store managers. The customer service department was overwhelmed. And Caleb was in denial. He held an all-hands meeting. Arthur narrated, stirring his coffee with a grimace. He stood up there, with his perfect suit and his perfect smile, and told everyone that this was just a small vocal minority of online trolls. He said it was resistance to positive change. He actually said that. But the numbers didn't lie. The company's internal sales data, which Arthur managed to copy onto a thumb drive for me, showed a shocking drop in reorder rates from their mid-sized distributors. The big players, the national grocery chains, were still locked into their contracts for now. But their regional managers were reporting a spike in unsold inventory. The stock price, which had been stable for years, began to dip. Just a point or two at first, but it was enough to make the market notice. And that's when Caleb started getting calls. Evelyn had her team at Viridian do it. Anonymous, polite, but pointed calls from concerned shareholders at Blue Ridge Investments or Mid-Atlantic Holdings. We're seeing some negative sentiment online. Mr. Caleb, can you speak to your strategy for managing brand perception? The recent dip in the stock price is concerning. Do you have a plan to address the reported quality control issues? Arthur told me Caleb was becoming a ghost in the office. He was either locked in his glass-walled room, pacing back and forth on the phone, or he was in frantic meetings with his new inner circle. He was looking for someone to blame. He blamed the marketing team for not spinning the narrative correctly. He blamed the bakers on the production floor for improperly implementing the new formulas. He blamed the sales team for not believing in the new vision. He blamed everyone but the man who had authored the entire disaster. The pressure was mounting, and Viridian kept squeezing. They quietly acquired another 10% of the company from a venture capital fund that was looking to exit. We now controlled 30%. We weren't just a block anymore. We were the single largest shareholder, and no one knew it was us. The panic in Caleb was palpable, even secondhand through Arthur's reports. He was a man who had built his career on image and control, and he was losing his grip on both. He was a captain who had deliberately scuttled his own ship to save money on barnacle cleaning, and now he was screaming at the ocean for being wet. I, on the other hand, felt a strange, chilling calm. I would sit in my apartment, which no longer felt like a monument to my failure, but a war room. I'd spread Arthur's documents across my dining table. The invoices, the lab reports on the inferior ingredients I'd paid for myself, the printed out customer complaints. It was a mountain of evidence. Each piece of paper was a nail for Caleb's corporate coffin. I told myself again and again, it wasn't about revenge. It was about consequences. My grandmother believed that what you put in, you get out. It was true for her recipes, and it was about to become true for Caleb's career. He had put in greed, arrogance, and deceit, and he was about to get his just desserts. The silent takeover was proceeding exactly as planned. He was so busy looking for enemies outside the gates, he had no idea the castle was already mine. The tipping point came on a Tuesday. It arrived in the form of an email, forwarded to me by Arthur from a sympathetic contact in the sales department. It was from the lead grocery buyer for AANDP Foods, our largest and most important national account. They represented nearly 30% of our annual revenue. The buyer, a sharp woman named Maria, was someone I had spent years building a relationship with. We'd bonded over a shared frustration with mediocre, mass-market products. She trusted my palate. The email was short and brutal. It was a formal notice of contract review. Maria cited an unprecedented spike in customer returns and a verifiable negative shift in product quality that violates the standards stipulated in our supply agreement. She was giving Vance Family Kitchens 30 days to rectify the issue or face immediate contract termination. This was the kill shot. Losing the AANDP account would be a catastrophic, unrecoverable blow. It would trigger a death spiral. Other chains would follow suit, not wanting to be left holding expired, unsellable inventory. Arthur called me that evening, his voice a strained whisper. "He's losing it, Lark." He got the email and he just snapped. He threw a tablet across his office. I saw it. It shattered against the glass wall. Then he called an emergency meeting with the sales VP and just screamed at him for half an hour. Accused him of not managing the relationship with Maria. The great Caleb, the master of optics and control, was cracking. His polished veneer was spiderwebbed with fissures, and the ugly, panicked reality was showing through. And then, my phone rang. The caller ID was a number I didn't recognize, but I knew who it was. I let it ring 3 times, took a deep breath, and answered. "Lark," Caleb's voice said. It was strained, stripped of its usual smug confidence. He was trying to sound casual, but the desperation was a sour undercurrent. "Lark, how are you?" "I'm fine, Caleb," I said, my voice cool and neutral. "What can I do for you?" "Listen, Lark. I think we may have been a bit hasty with the restructuring," he said, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "There's been some feedback on the new product rollouts, some challenges. Your expertise in that area, it was undervalued." I said nothing. I just let the silence stretch, forcing him to fill it. "Look," he blurted out, the fake nonchalance gone, replaced by raw panic. "I want to offer you your job back. No, not your old job, a new one. Chief Innovation Officer. A senior leadership position, a 20% pay increase. Whatever you want, we need you to come back and fix this. Straighten out the recipes. Talk to Maria at AANDP. You always had a good rapport with her." It was the most pathetic, transparently self-serving plea I had ever heard. He wasn't offering me a job. He was trying to buy my knowledge to save his own skin. He saw me as a fire extinguisher to put out the blaze he had started. This was the moment to savor the power shift. He was begging. The man who had erased me without a second thought was now begging me to come back and clean up his mess. The temptation to unload on him, to list every single one of his sins, was immense. But I remembered my grandmother's precision. I remembered Evelyn Reed's cold, strategic smile. Emotion was a liability. The plan was in motion, and it did not require a messy, satisfying shouting match. It required a clean, sharp cut. "Caleb," I said, and my voice was so calm, it sounded like a stranger's. "I appreciate the offer. I really do, but I'm afraid I'm not interested in that position." There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. He was completely unprepared for me to say no. "What do you mean?" he stammered. "This is a huge opportunity, Lark, to come back to lead. I have other plans," I said. And then I hung up. I didn't slam the phone down. I just gently disconnected the call. I knew what that simple 2-word phrase, "other plans," would do to a man like Caleb. It was a seed of pure terror. It told him I wasn't a victim sitting at home, defeated. It told him I was a player in the game. He just didn't know what piece I was on the board. He had no idea I was the one who now owned the entire game. The power had shifted. It was no longer his to wield. It was mine to take. 2 days later, Evelyn Reed, acting on my behalf as the representative of the majority shareholder, called for an emergency meeting of the board of directors. The stated purpose was to address the catastrophic decline in share value and discuss the immediate future of the company's leadership. I chose my outfit that morning with the care of a general preparing for a final battle. A simple, dark gray dress, professional, severe, unemotional. I walked into the headquarters of Vance Family Kitchens for the first time since I had been fired. The receptionist looked up, her eyes wide with shock. I didn't have a key card anymore, so I just said, "I'm here for the board meeting." She buzzed me through without a word. The walk to the boardroom felt like a victory lap in slow motion. Employees peeked over their cubicle walls, whispering. They saw the ghost they thought was gone, walking with a purpose she'd never had before. I entered the boardroom with Evelyn by my side. The air was thick with tension. The board members, a collection of gray-faced investors, and Caleb's hand-picked yes-men, were already seated. Caleb was at the head of the table, his face a mask of fury and confusion. When he saw me, a flicker of pure, unadulterated hatred crossed his face before he managed to smooth it over. "Lark," he said, his voice tight, "what is the meaning of this? This is a closed board meeting." "I'm aware," I said, taking a seat directly opposite him. Evelyn sat beside me, placing a sleek leather portfolio on the table. Evelyn cleared her throat, and the room fell silent. "Good morning, gentlemen," she began, her voice cutting through the tension, like a shard of ice. I am Evelyn Reed, a senior partner at Viridian Capital. We are here today on behalf of our primary client, who over the last several months has acquired a controlling interest in this company. As of 9 a.m. this morning, our client holds 51% of the voting shares of Vance Family Kitchens. A collective gasp went through the room. Board members looked at each other, their faces pale. Caleb looked like he had been shot. He stared at Evelyn, then at me, the blood draining from his face as the terrible, impossible truth began to dawn on him. "And who," he choked out, "is your client?" I let the question hang in the air for a moment. Then I leaned forward slightly. "I am," I said. My voice didn't need to be loud. In that room, it was the only one that mattered. "My name is Lark Vance. I am the majority shareholder of this company, and I am the designated heir to the Vance family estate." The chaos that erupted was immediate, but I let it wash over me. I turned to Mr. Abernathy, my family's lawyer, who had been waiting quietly by the door. At my nod, he stepped forward and began distributing a set of documents to the stunned board members. "Before you," I said, my voice cutting through the noise, "is a summary of the evidence my team has compiled. Purchase orders for inferior ingredients, laboratory analysis confirming the use of artificial flavorings and chemical additives, and a 300-page printout of customer complaints and negative reviews received in the last 60 days. I paused, letting them absorb the damning evidence of their CEO's incompetence. Caleb, in his pursuit of short-term profit, has systematically destroyed this company's most valuable asset, its quality. Then I delivered the final, fatal blow. Mr. Abernathy will now present a key document you all seem to have overlooked during the initial acquisition. It's an addendum to the trademark licensing agreement. We call it the Eleanor Clause. Abernathy, with the dramatic flair of an old-school litigator, read the clause aloud. He read the part about the non-negotiable quality standards, and then he read the line about the heir's right to revoke the trademark. When he was finished, I looked directly at Caleb. His face was ashen. He was a man watching his own execution. "Pursuant to the rights granted me in this legally binding contract," I said, my voice ringing with a clarity and power I had never felt before, "I, Lark Vance, do hereby formally and immediately revoke this company's right to use the trademark Vance Family Kitchens. Effective immediately. You will cease and desist from using my family's name on your now inferior products." The brand was gone. The name was mine again. All he was left with was a generic food company, with a warehouse full of garbage nobody wanted. Evelyn spoke into the dead silence. "And now for the final item on the agenda. I call for a vote of no confidence in the current Chief Executive Officer, Caleb." She looked at me. The other board members were irrelevant, their shares meaningless now. It all came down to me. I held Caleb's gaze. I saw it all in his eyes. The panic, the fury, the dawning horror of his complete and utter ruin. He had built his world on a foundation of my work, and I had just pulled it out from under him. "I vote to remove him," I said. It was done, quietly, precisely, no shouting, no tears, just a clean, perfect execution. Vindicated. In the aftermath, I didn't stick around to pick through the wreckage. That wasn't the point. I had no interest in running Caleb's broken company. I let Evelyn and her team at Viridian do what they do best. They dismantled it, sold off the physical assets, the factories, the trucks, the warehouses, to a competitor, and salvaged what little value was left for the remaining minority shareholders. It was a swift, clean, and profitable liquidation. My inheritance, the money my grandmother had so shrewdly grown, had been used as the leverage, and now it was returned to me, multiplied. But the real return on my investment wasn't financial. It was the reclamation of something priceless. I took the name, the one asset that mattered, and I started over. But I didn't start from scratch. I started from a place of strength. I founded a new company. We called it Eleanor's Table. It felt right. It felt true. Arthur Pym, my loyal soldier, is now my chief operating officer. He runs our logistics and supply chain with the meticulous care of a master watchmaker, ensuring that every ingredient that comes through our doors is the absolute best. Most of my old team, the talented bakers and food scientists who had been forced to watch Caleb dismantle their work, came with me. They didn't even hesitate. I didn't have to poach them. I just had to open the door. They were tired of making products. They wanted to create food again. We're smaller now, more focused. We sell directly to consumers and to a handful of high-end specialty grocers who value quality over quantity. Our profits are solid, but more importantly, our product is perfect. Every time I walk through our kitchen, the smell of real butter and Madagascar vanilla reminds me what this was all for. It wasn't about building an empire. It was about protecting a legacy. As for Caleb, I hear whispers now and then. His name is poison in the food industry. His spectacular, public flameout at Vance Family Kitchens became a cautionary tale whispered in boardrooms. He tried to start a consulting firm, but it failed. No one wants to hire a man whose only innovation was to ruin a beloved brand. He learned the hard way that a reputation, once shattered, is almost impossible to piece back together. And I realize now, looking back on it all, that this was never really about revenge. I know I've said that before. And maybe you don't believe me. Maybe you see a story of cold, calculated retaliation. And maybe, in a way, it is. But for me, it was about restoring a fundamental balance. It was about the simple, powerful idea that integrity has value, that a name means something. Caleb saw my grandmother's legacy as a brand, a collection of logos, colors, and marketing slogans that could be manipulated for profit. But he was wrong. A brand is a promise you make to a stranger. A name is a history you share with your family. He broke the promise, so I took back the history. This story, my story, is for anyone who has ever been overlooked, underestimated, or erased. It's for anyone who has poured their heart into their work, only to have someone else stamp their name on it. They might be able to take your job, your title, your credit, but they cannot take your talent. They cannot take your integrity. They cannot take your name, unless you let them. Don't wait for a seat at their table. You have the power to build your own. And trust me, the view is so much better when you're at the head of a table you built yourself. So if this story meant something to you, if it resonated with that part of you that knows what it's like to fight for your own worth, let me know. Share your own stories in the comments below. Like this video, and please hit that subscribe button. It helps to know that there are others out there who believe that in the end, quality and integrity will always win.